Hi everybody, this is Shabbir, the Geography faculty from Vajiram and Ravi. We are in a series of discussions where we have been taking up the question paper of 2018 Geography optional and suggesting what could have been the best way to answer some of the questions. The objective is not to enrich your content or to teach you what you could have written. It's more about how you could have managed with whatever you already know. Particularly some questions which are otherwise, they seem very vague, some questions which might even look like trivial questions. How do we manage that? And we manage those from the GS content we already have. The first question I'm taking up is question number 3B, which is account for the persisting negative trade balance of India. Yes, on the face of it, this is not a typical geography question. It looks more like a question from economy. But if you look at the width of the syllabus and the question they have been asking, this is not entirely unexpected. The GS content economy, I think all of us know. We know about India's deficit with China, with Middle East, with countries like Nigeria, Venezuela, and the products that we are lagging behind. The challenge is, how do I bring in the geographical concept? So if I divide the question in two parts, if the question asks you account for something, it means tell me the facts about it, what is it, where is it, and then tell me what are the reasons. Some bit of geography can come in here and some geography comes in here. The bulk of the perspective in geography will be when you're explaining why we had that deficit. And some of the geographical concepts we can bring in is the concept of inequality or imbalance development, because of which agriculture sector has been a big laggard, and India continues to import a lot of agriculture products, okay, that creates deficit. The geographical concept that in our economic development and growth, we almost bypassed or did not develop in the stage of takeoff, in the stage of maturity, where our industrial development was compromised. This again related to infrastructure issues, because of which we have a deficit with China, because India is net importer of Chinese products. The geographical concept could be around how we have not diversified our economy, because our economy in terms of its global presence is largely around the software sector, which is not good enough to deal with the entire range of imports that we have. So we have not done that. We have been dependent on imports where the services sector is not able to compensate for it. So if I take up these issues, and if you know something around models like core periphery model, if you can discuss something from what has been experience of our planning process itself and how the range of products that we use, it is not enough to deal with demands, you can talk about why we have high imports vis-a-vis exports. So having done some discussions on this, you can now talk about solutions. The solutions can also have geographical concept, like development dispersal, hill area development, or dry region development. You can talk about some economic measures also, like some policies that discourage import of gems, policies that manage the fall in the currency level of rupee, but keep that less because we will want the answer to be more around geography. One tool that you can use to show a bit of geography is draw the world map. And for India, you could show where all India's negative trade balance, is captured. What is India's status with China, with Venezuela, with Middle East, with the US? So this map itself will bring a bit of geography in your answers. That was accounting for the persisting trade balance. The next question is question 5A. Discuss the socio-economic problems associated with the left behind families of international migrants from India. Now this is a very, very interesting question. I do not think anyone of us would have anticipated this. That they're asking you, what is the impact of migrations from India on the people who are left behind? So not the typical rural urban problem that we have in India. Now for this, if I want to bring in geography, I have to know the regions and the locations from where we have high amount of out-migration. Okay. And then talk about in these regions, how are the local people impacted? Out-migrations in India in a large scale is largely from Punjab, but this was more historical, not now. There was a time when a lot of them moved out to Europe and towards Canada, that's one. Kerala is a very important area. Lot of population has moved out from here in the Middle East. And then we have lot of pockets across Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Karnataka, where the out migrants have been the educated elite, mostly the software engineers who moved out to US, and the families have been left behind. To this you can add other examples also, but more or less these three regions capture the recent trends in migration. Now the impact, you can start the discussion by saying that migration is a positive process. Out migration in a way helps reduce the pressure on the source regions. Out migration helps a remittance economy that supports the source regions. Out migration open up avenues for employment for the local youth who otherwise are not employed. So for the source regions, start discussion by saying that it is a positive process. And I give examples here. Okay. And this you can relate with geographical concept. Bring in Ravenstein's theory here. That out migrations and particularly long-term, long-distance out migrations are commercial or economic in nature. So those who move out, they actually help decongest the regions. Otherwise, the source regions will actually have problems of more poverty, problems of scarce resources. Having said this, so under this, the impact on the family is positive. Then you talk about some of the negative aspects. Now, negative aspects, not too much to expand or develop on. Negative could be probably a sense of loneliness. The negative aspects could be in terms of increasing disparities, where the families who have moved out and not moved out, the regions where out migration has happened compared to regions where out migrations don't happen. Compare, say, Punjab with Bihar, and there is regional disparities, and in the families also. Negatives could also imply one new dimension is the impact on the female population, where much of those who are left behind are always young children and females. Because even Ravenstein theory says this, that in long-term migration, a long-distance migration, the males are the more migrant. So that creates feminization of societies. That also creates a kind of gender issues here. In Kerala particularly, this has been a very big issue. So knowing this and bringing in the regional perspective and Ravenstein's laws, you have brought in geography in discussing what is the impact of out-migration on the families left behind. One thing you have to be careful about is the discussion of the impact should not be on the region in general, it should be on the families who are in the region. That's what the question demands. So wherever you are writing out the positives, you mention the word positive for the family, positive for society, positive for the local unemployed youth, positive for the local population. That way, this answer is interest. One aspect that I would like you to focus on is, though the topic is worded, or the topic is worded as discuss the socio-economic problems, discuss socio-economic problems, does not mean that you write only on the problems. The word discussion has some specific meaning. It's like a conversation going on, which includes what are the problems? Are they really problems? Is it possible there are advantages also? So the word discussion is not what are the problems. The discussion is not elaborate the problems. The discussion is not explain the problems. So the moment we have word discuss, you have to give me the positives and negatives also. And as the issue merits, the focus can be where you think it is more credible. So one confusion people might have is that the entire answer has to be on the problems alone. Not necessarily. In fact, this topic demands that you have a discussion. And the conclusion is, yes, there are problems, but the problems may not be as much as the positives. We move on towards the next question, question number 8B, which is startups may play important role in giving fillip to economic growth in India. Illustrate with examples. So another seemingly a vague question from the geographical perspective, but like I said, sometimes we are not left with much choice. Sometimes such questions can also become compulsory questions. We had one last year on GST also. This year, okay, we have this question. We have a question on language also. So how do you deal with such questions? And I've noticed this trend that such type of questions are generally 10 mark or 15 mark questions, which means you are not expected to write more than 1.5 page. The idea is, can you relate something that otherwise does not look like geography, and how do you write it from the geographical perspective? So take it in that sense. So such answers do not necessarily have to be brilliant answers in terms of richness, but they have to be innovative answers. Now, from our economy content, we know that startups are important. We know startups are a positive development. Now, how do I bring in geography is, now startup as a component of development, what it does is, it diversifies the economy. Startups as a part of development, because it diversifies, it also disperses development. Startups, they create employment. So that's a part of livelihood. Now, startups as a part of regional development can benefit if the startups are rural-based startups, if startups are women-based startups. So you can talk about startups in dryland farming economy, startups in forest-based economies. We can have exports and the rest. You can talk about startups that are catering to the unmet need of technology in the rural sector. So from the theme of balanced development and regional development, discuss the importance of startups. Yes, startups can impact the economic growth of India. Another aspect you can discuss under startups for economy is how startups are a very important basis of developing or continuing to develop on the Rostov's model. Because whether you talk about the conditions for takeoff, or you talk about the takeoff stage, or the drive towards maturity, we need to have smaller enterprises, firms spread across the country. We need enterprises, firms, we need companies in manufacturing, in services. We also need them across the country. So link that with Rostov's model, how the startups can help us transit through these phases. And in doing so, startups can take the economy to tier 2, tier 3 cities also. So as a part of your dispersal of development, okay, we can take startups to the lower tiers of urban development. Startups can be very important components of the peri-urban development of the country. So again, a part of the dispersal. So 4 ways I tried using geography. Geography through Rostov's model, geography through balanced development, geography through the development of smaller towns and cities, and geography as a part of diversifying the economy to include rural and women issues also. Now, if you know about the concept of development diffusion and information diffusion, you could also have one reference to Hagerstand's model of innovation diffusion. How startups can be a good fillip, okay, for encouraging the laggards to come in also, the early adopters to also adopt. So that's giving some bit of geographical, technical content. Otherwise, you don't need to elaborate much on that. Okay, now that's about 8B. We will discuss the next question. 8C. Is the land boundary of India with its neighboring countries a cultural divide or divided culture? Explain with suitable examples. Now, these are the 2 words or 2 phrases you need to be careful about. What do I mean by cultural divide? Cultural divide. And what do you mean by culture divided? Essentially, a boundary or a border that divides 2 cultures which are distinct from one another. Okay, so we'll call that boundary as one that is of this kind. But a boundary that is dividing a culture that otherwise seems to be continuous, then we say the boundary is resulting in culture divided. In the culture divided concept, the culture of India and the culture of neighboring country has to be very similar, and the boundary like a superimposed boundary. The boundary forced where the cultures are now divided. In this one, I must compare 2 regions where the cultures are actually different, and this boundary only reinforces that. So this is something like an antecedent boundary that existed earlier, and these boundaries are relatively more stable than these boundaries. So you understand this concept? In India, we have both. If you look at India-Pakistan boundary and India-Bangladesh boundary, okay, the Bengal and West Bengal boundary, this example of a culture divided. Okay, वैसे same way, Punjab and Punjab of Pakistan, Kashmir and the extensions into Pakistan. That's an example of a culture that was forcefully divided by the Red Cliff Line. Whereas, if you compare India-Bhutan, there are 2 distinct cultures, Assam in the south and Bhutan in the north, or Sikkim and Bhutan, 2 cultures where the boundary has been stable. We have got no debates on it. To some extent, this is also true for Mizoram and Myanmar. But I'll not say this for Nagaland and Myanmar. For Nagaland and Myanmar, the demands of greater Naga limb probably looks like a culture divided. For Mizoram, it is definitely 2 distinct cultures. Mizo culture different from Myanmar. To some extent, India Nepal is also this type. Why? Because the Nepali population, which is Terai and the hills, is not really a culture being divided. Why? Because historically, this has been the boundary of the two regions, two countries. This boundary of India Nepal has not been forced on us. And the similarity we have is because of ease of accessibility. So, India Nepal, even if there are commonalities, the India Nepal boundary is more of the first kind, where history, where the kingdoms were such that the boundaries happened after the cultures had matured. You can have a small debate on India Arunachal Pradesh. Although China would claim Arunachal Pradesh as an example of culture divided, that's why they call Arunachal Pradesh as Little Tibet. But if you look at history, the culture of Arunachal Pradesh is very different from the culture of Tibet. And the best example of that is the religion. Arunachal Pradesh is not typically Tibetan or the influence of Chinese culture. It is more Hinduism in Arunachal Pradesh, although there are monasteries, including Tawang. But Arunachal Pradesh is very much more Indian than the parts beyond India's border. So there is a conflict across the Mekong-Mahon line, China demanding, but that is more of a geopolitical strategy by China to impose some demands on us. Otherwise, in geographic concept, it is not an issue of conflict. So I hope all these videos and discussions help you in understand how you can figure out what the question demands, how you can force in some concepts of geography. Like in this, I desisted from it, but if you know about consequent boundaries, superimposed boundaries, antecedent boundaries, okay, you could have done the answer better. So if you're conscious of the concepts you have read and you can apply it, your chance of scoring well definitely increases. So I wish you all the very best, that you score well, and I hope it was a learning experience worth the time we have put in. So looking forward to discussing more issues across different videos. Thank you so much.